Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If you are joining us from beautiful spring Montreal, if you are joining us as our two distinguished participants in this conversation, Rachel and Roman do from Europe, then a beautiful good evening. And of course, if you're joining us from Israel, the same greeting applies. Welcome back to yet another, I think, fascinating, I hope, thought-provoking experience and event here under the auspices of the Azrieli Institute of Israel Studies. My name is Csaba Nikolenyi. I am professor of political science at Concordia University, and I'm also director of the Azrieli Institute. And it's really such a delight to be able to bring to you two very special friends, two very special individuals who made the film that most, or perhaps all of you who are joining us today were able to watch in the comfort of your homes yesterday. A film that through the fascinating story of a Ukrainian Jewish family told us about the trials and tribulations, the experiences of Ukrainian Jewry. These two individuals are, of course, the maker, the director of the film, Rachel Levy, who is joining us from Holland today, this evening, and one of the protagonists of the film. And we are so fortunate to be able to actually bring him to your screen, Roman Girshfeld. So Rachel and Roman, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Before I would start the Q&A and before I would start the event, let me just read out a few words from Rachel's biography that is on her website, because it's really so important to note that Rachel is not only a very inspiring and accomplished filmmaker, Rachel is also an academic and holds a very important and distinguished academic background. Rachel studied Semitic languages and international relations at the master's level at the University of Amsterdam, where she specialized in international law. She also published a book based on her studies called Israel on a Weekday that was published in 2008 by Contact Publishers. In this book, Rachel delved into international family law, and she looked specifically at the issue of international child mobility. From 2004 to 2010, Rachel was the permanent correspondent of the International Press Service, a DPA, and wrote extensively about the international tribunals that took place in The Hague. Rachel completed a master's in Jewish studies, partly from Columbia University and the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York. She was also concerned with, and she was interested in the philosophy of Yeshayahu Leibovich and the question of Jewish legal autonomy in modern times. Between the years of 2000 and 2009, Rachel lived in Israel, in New York, and also in the Netherlands. I am going to hold off with introducing our second guest, Roman, in detail, partly because you already saw so much about him in the film, but also because part of this conversation, I hope, will be about opening up more about Roman, Roman's family, his experiences in conversation with Rachel, and of course, importantly, in conversation with all of us. Before we would get the conversation going, I would like to acknowledge the tremendous support and initiative that made this event possible, that was offered by my dear friend and colleague at Concordia, Dr. Isabel Benoit Gelber. Isabel is part of the academic board of the Azrieli Institute of Israel Studies, joining us from the Department of Biology. And it was Isabel's initiative and inspiration that made the connection with Rachel in particular possible. And so we are truly delighted for this event, for this connection. And without further ado, let me call this event now to its order and open. So as a first question, Rachel and Roman, I would like to ask you to tell us a little bit about the history and the genesis of the film. How did this come about? Rachel, you had already been an accomplished academic. You had so many other interests. How did you become interested in Ukrainian Jewry? And how were you able to gain the trust of the Girshfeld family so that to tell us, the viewers, this history through their story? And Roman, then we would love to hear from you about how the relationship with Rachel from your family's perspective unfolded.
Well, first of all, good evening, everybody. I'm very delighted to be here and to be able to talk to you about my film. My interest in Ukrainian Jewry actually comes from my time that I studied Yiddish in America, because it is when you study Yiddish that you suddenly understand that the most important Jewish movements in modernity, almost all of them were born in Ukraine. If it's the Hasidic movement, if it's the Hebrew movement, Zionism, everything begins in Ukraine. So for me, it was obvious that at some point during my career, I would do something about Ukraine. Furthermore, since 2011, I'm a member of the European Jewish Parliament, which is a parliament initiated and also led by Ukrainian Jews. And there are members of all European countries who are members of this parliament, and I'm one of them. And we meet usually we try to meet twice per year, and either in Kiev or in Brussels, once in Berlin. And then you see Ukrainian Jewry in modern times. And what I saw when I first came there was a completely different kind of Jew as what I was used to in Western Europe. I saw Ukrainian Jews who were very proud and strong and much more confident than Western European Jews. So this sparked my interest. And for me, this gave me even more motivation to one day do something about Ukrainian Jews. And in 2018, the opportunity arose to realize this dream. So through various contacts, we got in touch with the father of Roman, who was, and that's actually how things started, and how we slowly got in touch together, and finally were able to travel to Ukraine and make this film.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Richard. Roman, from your perspective, how did this relationship start and unfold? I mean, all of a sudden, as Rachel told us in 2018, there is this wonderful young West European Jewish filmmaker knocking on your door, asking you to tell the world your story. What was your reaction?
Well, I have to make one small correction.
Please.
My flight was cancelled on the day that Roman was to be interviewed. So I spoke to his father extensively, but the interview with Roman was done by my director.
Fair enough. Thank you for that correction. Great.
First of all, good evening, and it's a pleasure to participate in such a nice evening conversation. When Rachel and her team contacted us, the motivation behind the movie that they were making was very interesting. To tell the story of my father, the father of my father, the story of our family, and not only to tell the story of our family, but tell it as an example of a Jewish family that my grandfather immigrated from the Eastern Europe to Ukraine, and so on. The story unfolded, and how we all integrated into the different times of USSR, and how we've changed generation after the generation. So basically, Rachel saw, 3 generations of Hirschfeld family, and heard about another 1 or 2. So it was a good idea to see the whole, to have a systematic approach onto integration of Jews, say for 80 years or century of modern recent times, and tell the world exactly what happened as an example of our family. And we have many Jewish families that came through similar conditions. And I really hope that the movie, that you like the movie. And there are lots of personal things there. We try to be open, and Rachel interviewed in an open manner, in open way, open-ended questions. And we really like to, and we couldn't say no to Rachel in this unfolding story.
Roman, when the approach from Rachel and Rachel's director came, was it unexpected? Wasn't it expected that all of a sudden there is an interest from the West wanting to tell the story of Ukrainian Jewry? Or was it something that you had anticipated? Was it something that you had always wanted to do? And maybe not even just personally, but can you just paint us the picture of how you and your generation of young Ukrainian Jews thought about wanting to tell their story to us, Jews, and not just Jews, people interested in Jewish history, sitting in different parts of the world, Israel, North America, Western Europe. Were you bursting, wanting to tell the story, or were you surprised that all of a sudden the West comes knocking on the door, wanting to hear what we go through?
It's rather the second thing. We live normal lives. We don't see anything. We can't see anything so surprising about us. We integrate it into the community. And once of a sudden, a filmmaker comes and tell the world what's happening. And for us, it's something like part and parcel. It's our life. We can't see anything so surprising in it. We just adapt it to real life. And of course, when there is a demand for knowing how the Jews lived in Ukraine, we are very open to tell our story.
Thank you. Rachel, can you tell us a little bit about particular challenges that you faced while dreaming up, but also implementing the execution of the film? Were there any hiccups, any obstacles that you never anticipated, or was it just another normal international project that filmmakers should be used to facing?
No, for me it was very, very different because I speak 7 languages, but I don't speak Russian and I don't speak Ukrainian. And for me, it was the first time ever that I conducted interviews with a translator. And that's a whole different thing. Fortunately, my director speaks Russian and also masters Ukrainian quite well. So that helped a lot. But speaking directly with people, yet not speaking their language, is very different and it's much harder. Because you often miss sensitivities, or you think you may miss sensitivities.
But that, of course, wasn't a problem with Roman, right?
No, but as I mentioned, the day we had this interview planned, my flight was cancelled.
And so the one interview that you would have been able to handle personally,
yes,
you couldn't. Roman, I was personally very moved to listen to your father's description of his youth and how yes, of course, he was an integrated member of in the Soviet days of the world, but he always stood out and was special in school. He had a very special experience. When you look at your youth in post-Soviet Ukraine, what would be some of the ways in which you find similarities with your father's youth and upbringing, and what would be some of the differences that you would point to? And if I could ask you to be personal, is that something that you and your dad ever discussed in the past? Did the film play any role in bringing you and him, perhaps other members of the family, closer to want to talk about the past? Or you did the film and that was it? You told the filmmakers your story and now you move on?
Certainly not. We we had so many questions which you have to think over and over. They're not simple yes or no questions. They're open-ended questions. And once you start answering them, you start thinking, you start remembering things. And obviously, it didn't take an hour. It was taking a couple of days. So we had enough time to discuss and think and resemble and talk about what happened in the past with our family. Certainly, we know, how the story of our family unfolds, but difficult sometimes. So interesting questions stroke us in a way that we wanted to see the similarities in a way that, say, our family Hirschfelds, especially the men part, moved further. For example, my grandpa, he was 19 when he moved to Lviv. At that time, 1939, it was part of Poland. And then when Russia participated in the Second World War together with Germans, it became part of the USSR. And apparently he never saw his family, and he started his own life. So separation from the family. My father, he was 18 and he came from one town to the other to start separation with his family, his own life. I was 19 when I moved to the University of Manchester in England to separate with my family and start with my own life, so on and so forth. So, and if you asking a question regarding the similarities that my father had when he was a kid or youngster, and me, look, we all were born in USSR times. I was born in 1981, so things changed, but still the approach is still the same. As you can see, now it's very tough times. We have a war between Russia and Ukraine, and basically in Russia, they still live in Soviet times, and they still instill all the propaganda of Soviet times. So we all had this influence of Soviet upbringing. And in this way, my father always told me that Jews will not get anything easily. And when I came to England, I was a Ukrainian from a third world country. Even though I had a very good skills in sciences, I was interested in scientists at that time. I realized that I need to be the best in whatever I'm doing in order to get a good job, in order to get good propositions further. So Jews will always need to do extra effort to get any good opportunity in this life. And this is exactly what my father told me. And this is exactly what his father told him when my father in 60s was a youngster, and he needed to get a good place to work, to be accepted to the university when Jews were not able to be accepted at the university. So Jews always needs to study harder, do a bit extra in order to be successful. This is what my father said, and this is something that we always discuss in our family.
Thank you, Roman. And I just want to share with the audience, if you permit me, that in the few minutes leading up to the beginning of this conversation, we actually talked about the importance and perhaps the symbolic significance of the University of Manchester, where you studied chemistry, the same department where the first president of the State of Israel, Dr. Chaim Weizmann, was, of course, established. So may that be an important harbinger and indicator of the great things that you will be doing in the future for the Jewish people and beyond. So that's excellent. Thank you very much, Roman. Rachel, could you tell us a little bit about the reception of the film? What audiences have seen the film so far in Europe, beyond? Did you show the film in Jewish communities, outside Jewish communities? And in general, what was the nature of the feedback, the reaction that you have received so far? You told the story, and you are telling the story of a people, but also of a family. How do people react to it? Well,
the film was made in the late spring of 2019, and it was broadcast. In December 2019, and we were trying to get it at various film festivals in Europe in the spring of 2020. And of course, COVID came. So all of these things were cancelled, which means the film has been broadcast in the Netherlands and in Belgium, I think 3 times already on national television. We had a good reception. We've had a meeting, like an event, the way that we are having right now in the Netherlands for a Jewish Cultural Institute, also discussing the movie. And basically there has been a good interest, but COVID has changed a lot. In the last few weeks, I received some invitations from Jewish festivals worldwide asking about the film, and I think the war in Ukraine has something to do with it. People are looking for more information about Ukraine and about the way the war has impacted the Jewish community. Of course, when we made this film, everything was just before the war. And in the film, I also mentioned that what you see, what is very obvious at that time in Ukraine is that you see people trying to build their country. Jews are trying to build a country, and the general population is trying to build a country and transform it into a modern country. And there was a lot of energy and a lot of goodwill to make this work and to join a community of modern democratic nations. But at the same time, you could also sense while I was there that whether or not this would actually succeed strongly depended on what would happen in the world stage. And what we have seen, regrettably, since March, is that things have been transformed yet again. When the war erupted, what you saw is that the balance, it was as if Ukraine was kind of balancing on a very small road. And now that the war has started there, and it seems, I think, that it will take some time, it will be in a crisis for the foreseeable future.
Mm-hmm. I would definitely like to come back to this point in a minute or so. But before doing that, Rachel, I would like to probe you a little bit on a personal level, as I did with Roman just a few minutes ago. So you had a scholarly academic drive to want to know, through your studies of Yiddish and Jewish history and culture, wanting to know more about Ukrainian Jewish history, the Ukrainian Jewish story. Now you certainly have done that, and you have shared tremendous knowledge with us. How has the experience and the process of making this film, of working through the hours of conversations and soul searching, getting into the very private personal confessions and histories of people whose language you didn't understand, how did it change you? What kind of a Rachel Levy, what kind of a filmmaker are you now after the film compared to where you were?
I was curious about Ukraine. I'm even more curious. And if there's one thing that I know for sure, that I will go back. Because there, as I said, there is so much energy in this area. There are so many different currents going on and different movements. Both Jewish and general. It's a unique part of Europe. It's a crossroads. So if you want to know something about possible directions of the future of Europe, you just have to be in this part of the world to see it and to be part of it.
Does this mean that you and perhaps Roman are talking about future collaborations, cooperations? Is there a sequel to the story, if you will, to the film, to the story that you are telling in the film that we can look forward to? What is your next project going to be about?
Well, I haven't discussed this with Roman. But we are talking. We are the director and I. We are thinking about making a new movie about Ukraine. But it's still very preliminary. We are in the very first stages, and it's not possible to tell you anything concrete about it yet.
That's totally understandable. Please keep us on your list when you're looking for venues to bring the next movie to, because we would be absolutely delighted to welcome you in our community and bring the film, of course, to our audience. Now I would like to ask you to reflect on where we are today, and where the Ukrainian Jewry is today. The film, obviously, as any film, has to have an endpoint. That endpoint, that conclusion, plausibly, might have been very different if the film were made today. So, as Roman, you mentioned, for the past 13 weeks now, there is a war between Ukraine and Russia following the Russian invasion in February. This, of course, catches the Jewish population in a particularly challenging point, which we can understand, of course, from Jewish history in general, but from having watched the film in particular. What are your personal thoughts, reflections? If you have a crystal ball, what does your crystal ball tell us about the future of the country and about the Jewish future of the country?
I'll start from the second question. The future of any country where the Jews live is always prosperous. Jews normally search for prosperity in the country, and to my personal humble opinion, Jews live at those places where the countries grow and have fruitful and prosperous future. Ukraine and Judaism and Jews are quite collaborating, I would say, for the couple of centuries, and lots of Jews been living and still living in Ukraine. I would say thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. I presume more than 100,000 Jews. Nothing changed this scenario with Russian war, Russian invasion in Ukraine. We have Jewish president. We have right now in Mariupol I've seen in the news around 40 Jews are still there out of all the warriors and all the soldiers that are trying to keep up with Azovstal. There are 40 Jews there, which clearly said that it's their land and they are defending their own land. And there are still hundreds of Jews that I know that are still in Ukraine, and some of them are in army, others just volunteer. And for them, Ukraine is the country where they live, and their parents or grandparents died, and they're planning to continue living there. So to this particular point, nothing has changed. If I have a crystal ball and see what's going to happen, first couple of weeks, everyone was very scared. And I would say first 2 months. Now we see things changing. I'm pretty sure this war will take place for another half a year, if not years. Probably it won't be as brutal as it is right now. It will be slower, but still painful. Whether it will break the country into pieces, no. Ukraine is united to a very, very high extent. Lots of volunteers, people donating their own money. I donated a lot of money as well. And it's a very, very strong support of the president. Extremely strong support. I would say more than 90%. And apparently he's a leader. And I would say he's one of the leaders in the world right now. We never thought so. And it felt like he was leaving for this particular moment in his life. So what's going to happen with Ukraine? There will be wars for the next decades. There will be some kind of conflicts in between Russia and Ukraine because of Europe and Russia, and it doesn't matter whether they're going to be Putin or any other emperor. But I'm pretty sure Ukraine will become stronger with all the support. The country will be rebuilt. Unfortunately, and very unfortunately, those people who died or wounded won't be healed. People will be, many people died. But the country as such will be quite strong and stronger with the European support, and will be eventually integrated into the EC, I presume, or probably NATO, but it's up to politics. But the Ukraine as a country will survive. The Judaism in the country is still there. And when Russians said that they're trying to kill the Nazis, and we have a Jewish president and Jews supporting and fighting against that, I'm pretty sure they're lying. So we don't have that much Nazis in Ukraine. We mostly have Jews.
So, Roman, so that belief that especially your father expressed towards the end of the movie about the optimism in the Jewish continuity and Jewish future in Ukraine is unshattered, and you share that optimism, even in this very difficult international situation that we are facing today. That's, in a nutshell, that's what you're saying, right?
Oh yeah, nothing has changed to this point in this question. We're still feeling optimistic, and people want to go back home. We have strong roots there.
Roman, this is a very uplifting and inspiring point that you're sharing with us, and I want to thank you for being so unequivocal and so sincere about that. Thank you. Rachel, over to you. If you have a crystal ball, what do you see in it?
Well, I think Roman is right that it will probably take a long time before this war ends. It might be months, it might be years. It will probably not be as brutal as he said, but it's not over right now. I'm not sure that I share his opinion about Jews in Ukraine. Because if the war continues and the people have the resources to leave, they will leave. And then the question remains, who will rebuild the Jewish institutions? Who will lead the Jewish organizations? And who will form these communities? You cannot do anything without the resources. And if the resources are not in Ukrainian territory, then you have a problem, and you get the same problem as what you have in many Western European countries. One of the things that were remarkable for me when I visited Ukraine in the past was that you had so many successful Ukrainian Jews who sponsored the Jewish community, who donated money, who rebuilt synagogues, who renovated cemeteries, who financed schools, Jewish youth camps. And it made a huge difference compared to what I was used to in the Netherlands, in Belgium, in Germany, where all these communities are struggling. It's very hard to get financing to renovate a synagogue. The synagogue in my hometown is extremely neglected. And there's nobody who's going to donate 200,000 euros. But the father of Roman renovated the Kharkov synagogue. And with him, others also did. And they actively supported Jewish life. So the question is, will these people still continue to do this if they don't live in Ukraine anymore? I hope they will, but if they don't, then I don't know what's going to happen to those who don't have the resources or the options to leave.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. That's a very, very concrete worry, of course. It's fascinating for us to hear the different perspectives that you and Roman share with us. Ladies and gentlemen, this is very much your forum and your event, and I do apologize for taking up, as I often do, so much of the valuable time that you also dedicate to being with us. At this point, I would like to open up the conversation between Rachel and Roman and yourself. So if you would like to put your observation, your comment, or question into a chat box, I will try to moderate and follow your questions as they are coming through. If you would like to ask a question directly from our guests, they graciously agreed also to take questions that way. So all I would ask is that you please put up your virtual hand, and then I will call upon you when I see that you indicate your interest in asking a question. And while you're thinking about the question that you would like to ask from Rachel and or Roman, let me just mention that it is still possible to watch the film today. Corey has just placed the information with the link and the password in the chat box. We do ask you to please hurry up and try to, if you haven't yet seen the film, do so as soon as possible, because anytime after this event is over, the distribution company may be ending the validity of the link. So it's still possible to see it, but that might not be so for much longer than a few more hours. So any questions from anyone? And feel free to put up your virtual hands as well. We just wait a minute or so. I see a hand from Dr. Isabel Benoit-Gerber. So Isabel, thank you for being with us today. And please, the screen and the microphone is yours.
Good afternoon, good evening, Rachel, Roman. Hello, nice to meet you actually, and to see you for real. I was wondering, in the film, you a little bit approached this idea, and you mentioned beginning, in the same family, Jewish family, obviously, for this purpose, do you also have, maybe it's a politically incorrect question, but would you see, people in favor of Russia or only for Ukraine? Is there any division within families that you would see?
First of all, I would like to ask a question. At what particular time? If we're talking about 2014, 2013, it's one thing. If we're talking about right now, it's the other thing.
Well, up to you to develop before or after. I'm,
Before 2013, we had loads of wrong ideas about what Russia is trying to bring to Ukraine. And yes, there were some Jewish families, and even in my family, we had some false ideas. After 2014 and the beginning of DNR, LNR, of Russia invasion, which we still think it was sort of a separation of the territories, so revolution, it was clearly an invasion into Ukraine and taking of Crimea. We clearly understood that Russia is an enemy, and we understand that the war, the real war, will happen one day. Some of my friends and some of my Jewish friends from 2014 and even until 2022, 24th of February, thought that Russia will came, or the influence of Russia or Ukraine should be united. And it was mostly the stories, emotions. But when the real war happened, and I still remember the morning of 24th of February, I talked to many of my friends, and we're all united. We really understood what Russia will bring. And it's clearly killing, raping, and evil things to Ukraine. So this is what war normally brings, if there is a normality in this. So all our family is united. We understand what Russia is and what are they trying to do with us. So we don't have any false ideas anymore.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Isabel. Next, we have a hand from Ellen Weiss. So, Ellen, please come on up to the microphone, so to speak.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I have a question about what's going on in the Ukraine. So the three Nazi and neo-Nazi groups that I've read about and seen on television, the Azov battalions, the Right Sector, and the Stepan Bandera gangs, what about them? And particularly before this event happened, I'm going to just read this out from the Israeli embassy in Kiev on January 1st, 2022. And they said these big demonstrations with hundreds of thousands of people coming out for the Stepan Bandera gang. And Stepan Bandera was the Adolf Hitler of the Ukraine. Israel said, Israel condemns the nationalist march in honor of Stepan Bandera. Glorification of those who supported the Nazi ideology desecrates the memory of the victims of the Holocaust in Ukraine. We demand a thorough investigation of the anti-Semitic manifestations that took place during the march, according to the law adopted in Ukraine in 2021. So that was a part of what they were saying at that time. And the pictures that I've seen of these neo-Nazi demonstrations are quite frightening as far as I'm concerned. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alan. Roman, Rachel, any reaction?
And one question?
So the question was, any reactions? What are your reactions or reflections on the neo-Nazi threat and presence that Alan made references to?
If I can start, Rachel, just a short note. It's yes, we had this movement, I would say, and I personally do not support it. None of our Eastern Ukrainian Jews support it, or any other normal Jews support that. But there is a big but. They don't kill Jews. They don't do any harm. Yes, they're Nazis in their movement, probably. I wouldn't judge it. I personally don't like it. I see this as something which should go back in times, and the documents looks like they supported there from that time, the Nazi time, but they don't do any harm so far to Jews. Do I think this should happen in Ukraine? No, I see Ukraine without this part, but it's our history, and if they don't kill any of the Jews, and it's not a peaceful movement, but kind of peaceful, at least more peaceful than football fans.
Thank you, Roman. Rachel, any reactions from your observations in the field?
I think that Roman's reaction characterizes the strength of Ukrainian Jews, and that's what I thought was special when I encountered Ukrainian Jews, because we in the West, when we see those images and when we see protests like this and groups of neo-Nazis, then we are worried and then we are anxious and we think, oh, what's going to happen here? And like the relaxed way that Roman just spoke about it, and is a similar way that I also encountered with other Ukrainian Jews who are perhaps more used to stronger anti-Semitism than we in the West are, and not so easily intimidated.
Fascinating. Thank you, Rachel.
You're right, not intimidated. We're not so much afraid of that with the Jewish president.
Okay. Thank you. Next, we have a question from Ellen Birnbaum. Ellen, if you're here. Great.
Hi, well, thank you. I want to thank all of you so much for making this film and this discussion available to your viewers. I actually have two questions, but if it takes too much time, I understand if you cut me off. One is, it was very interesting to me when the point at which the film ended, because obviously, before the war, a lot of us, especially in the US, had an association with President Zelensky with his conversation with our ex-president. But things have changed so enormously with the beginning of the war. I wonder, Roman, if you could comment, because you alluded to the positive feeling that the population now has about President Zelensky. If you could talk about the point at which the film ended and the evolution, or maybe it was quite sudden, from that point until the beginning of the war and now.
If I understand you correctly, the question is whether things changed with acceptance as Zelensky as a president by Jews and by community. Is it correct?
Well, I had the impression from the end of the movie that people were a little bit questioning his position, given the way he handled the phone call with our ex-president. And it seemed as though it was a little bit shaky, but now that is completely different. I wondered if you could comment about that. Is that clearer?
It's a good question. First of all, yes, when we voted for Zelensky, we voted for some change. He was a young man, quite spirited and talented, but without any experience in political life. And he was questioned and challenged by rivals and by quite a few other political parties in Europe, and particularly Russia, thought he was very weak. And his ratings were going down. His support was around 45-50% when he was a president. And just before the war, say a couple of months before the war, his ratings, if I'm not mistaken, were 25%, 30%. And clearly there are people who are they're ready for the war, apparently. The war times, something that they open up to the world and they live for the moment. No one of us thought, and particularly Mr. Putin never thought that we will have such a strong support for a president and he will be a real leader. I presume he, as a president, as a human being, never thought that he's got these special superpowers inside him. He has nothing to lose. He's quite a humble, simple man. He's not into bribery as such. Probably he doesn't have that much experience, but he thought that he lived for this particular moment. I'm pretty sure when the war will be over, he will be similar to Mr. Churchill in some instances, and his ratings will go down because during the normal times, there might be some different presidents, different parliaments that will make the life of Ukrainians better, no more in economics, no more into how to make things better for business, and so on and so forth. But during the war times, you just have to win the war, or at least make the life of people, easier to survive. And Mr. Zelensky is doing it perfectly, I would say. I think this covers your question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I don't know if there's time to ask another, or whether you want to.
Yes, there is, Ellen. Yes. And then there is a question in the chat box and one more question from the screen, and that will unfortunately have to conclude our event, but there is time for your second question. Yes.
Thank you. I'll try to make it quick. If I remember correctly, also at the end of the film, Rachel, perhaps it was you who commented that of all the former Soviet countries, in terms of anti-Semitism, Ukraine stood in the best position. But it still didn't sound too good. And it seems that there may be a discrepancy between you, Rachel, and you, Roman, in terms of how you see the population and their anti-Jewish stances. I wonder if either or both of you could comment on that.
Well, I think that, as I said in the in the previous, when I'm answering the previous question, there is a difference between Western Jews and Eastern Jews, and we in the West are perhaps easier intimidated on the one hand, but we are also much more aware of how fast you need to respond if anti-Semitism arises.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we are very alert, and we live fortunately in the West in a situation in most countries where you are able to stand up and to speak out. And we probably do faster than Eastern Jews may do. But perhaps, Roman, you should give your perspective on this.
Oh, I fully support you. The Western Jews could speak up and say exactly what's happening and influence the political situation in the country. This is exactly what we didn't have in the Soviet times, and we need to survive, and we didn't have a voice. But for the last 10 or 15 years, the influence of Jews in the business and in political situation of the country was very, very strong. We're talking about big business organizations, big non-governmental organizations. Look, at one time in Parliament of Ukraine, there were tens of Jews. Prime Minister was Jewish. President was Jewish. It looks more like an Israel parliament to me. So we were not that much afraid for the last 10, 15 years of any anti-Semitism because of the strong influence on the country of various Jewish communities. So if anything arises, we were quite alerted, which never happened during the USSR times.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for the question also, and thank you for being with us. The next question is from Montreal, and this is in the chat box. And the question is by Albert, Mr. Albert Hershkovich. It's wonderful to have you with us, Albert, as always. And the question is not taking us to a different direction, not towards the west from Ukraine, but towards north and east. And so the question is about the relationship between Ukrainian Jews and Russian Jews. Can you tell us a little bit about the relationship between these two communities in terms of family ties, friendships? Is there brotherly love or animosity between them, as there is today between the general Russian and Ukrainian populations? Anything from your own personal observations, Roman or Rachel, if you came across anything that allowed you to see Russian and Ukrainian Jews interacting, we would be delighted to hear.
Well, I have a very good friend who is Ukrainian, and he's married to a Russian woman, both Jewish, and there are many more families like this. These are people who live in the Netherlands, but I'm sure that the same exists both in Ukraine and in Russia and in Israel, because we Jews, we cross borders. Yeah, maybe Roman, I think it's better that you share your experience.
Rachel, you're absolutely right. We do cross borders, but during this wartime, things changed a bit. Even I know quite a few examples where one part of the family supports Russia, the other part supports propaganda, works strongly, and it doesn't really matter what's your religion. I have a very good friend of mine. He's from Russia. He's Jewish. He moved to Israel right now. He cannot stand it. This propaganda, he cannot stand what's happening in Ukraine. So he fully supports Ukraine. And the other, and I know the other Jewish family, quite strong Jewish family in Moscow, they are just saying, sorry, things like that happening, but we're still in Russia. We don't have our voice. We cannot help or anything. But quite a few Jewish and non-Jewish families in Ukraine wants the Jews and non-Jews in Russia to strongly support what's really happening and at least say it aloud, which is not allowed in Russia at this particular moment. Hope things will one day change. Whether we are brothers and sisters, yes, we're brothers and sisters, but there is a strong separation between these two brotherly nations now. We're not any brotherly nations anymore. And after what happened, we would never, or in next decades, will never become.
Okay, thank you very much. And the last question goes, I believe, to Corey. Corey, I think that's your hand. Yes? So,
yes.
Come up to the microphone, so to speak.
Thank you. So in regards to anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic conspiracies, especially coming out of Russia, do you find it's more of an asset or a liability to have Jewish leaders like Zelensky as the president? And if I'm not mistaken, the Ukrainian prime minister and defense minister are Jewish as well. Am I right?
Prime minister now, no, he's not. Used to be Jewish, but not anymore.
Okay. So in general, do you find it's more of an asset or a liability with rampant anti-Semitism online?
It's not an easy question. I think the more Jewish goes into business and politics, to some extent, it helps to protect and control so much anti-Semitism. But at the other point, the more people become poor and they see the problems and they see that in front of a nation they have a president or any political person or rich person with Jewish background, Jewish religion, they could easily point the finger and say it's all because of these guys. And it's always a problem that we live this life because of Jews. It's always easy to do that. So to my humble opinion, the more Jews go into light, the more troubled times could be in front of them. So our best idea is to be quiet and controlling the situation, not to be in front and not to be in light.
Thank you, Roman. Rachel, any concluding final thoughts?
No, I think there's not much that I can add to that.
Okay. Well, in that case, Rachel and Roman, I would like to thank you ever so much for making this, for being part of this film, and for sharing your precious and valuable time under these very, very difficult and challenging situations, in particular today, to be with us and to share these very personal, but also professional reflections. I certainly have learned an awful lot from each of you, and I'm sure that I speak for many of us also in the audience. Before I would say goodbye to everyone, I would like once again to thank my friend and colleague, Dr. Isabel Benoit-Gerber, for her wonderful initiative and inspiration that made this event possible. And also I would like to acknowledge the hard work by Corey Newman, who, as the last question, without whose help and daily efforts, our events would not be happening and would not be the success that they are. So Isabel, Corey, thank you so much for everything that you do. Your dedication and your enthusiasm are very, very much valued, and I do thank you for everything that you've done. Friends, please stay tuned. Although the academic year is now over, we do have another important event coming up at the end of the month on May 31st. In collaboration with Concordia University Library, we will be presenting the two winners of the inaugural Concordia University Library Azrieli Institute of Israel Studies Best Book Award for Israel Studies. We will have two scholars visiting us virtually on screen from Israel, Dr. Inbal Benashe-Gittler and Dr. Haggai Ram, who are the co-winners of this first inaugural prize. Without further ado, Rachel and Roman, once again, thank you so much for being with us. What is your evening time? And friends, ladies and gentlemen, as always, we look forward to welcoming you back on our screens and God willing, soon enough, back in our lecture halls and in our seminar rooms. Please stay healthy, everyone. Have a wonderful summer. And if you cannot join us on the 31st, we hope that you will be able to join our events in the fall semester. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, Roman. Bye, Rachel.
Bye. Thank you.